So we're gonna go over how Brazil claimed its independence over Portugal. So quick introduction of everything that happens is that Portuguese tyranny over Brazil has dated all the way back to 1500s when Pedro Alvarez Cabral and his fleet discovered Brazil on their way to India to set up trades. At this time, Brazil was inhabited by Tupinamba Indians. At first, they worked together harvesting trees until Portugal tried to enslave the Indians to work at the plantations that the Portuguese built. Eventually, most of the Indians died by disease or they fled Brazil trying to get away from slavery. Gold was then found in Brazil in the 1690s, sparking a gold rush, causing everyone in Europe to mine gold in Brazil. This causes overpopulation and a lack of resources in Brazil. Eventually, in 1808, Dom João VI fled to Rio de Janeiro, which is the capital, after Napoleon invaded Portugal. Eventually, he was ran out of Brazil in 1821, leaving his son Pedro I to run Brazil. On September 7th, 1822, Pedro I proclaimed Brazil's independence from Portugal. So the question we're looking for is what events happened during Portuguese rule over Brazil that led to Pedro I proclaiming Brazil's independence on September 7th, 1822. So the Portugal ended up stripping all of Brazil of its wood. So Brazil was discovered by Portugal in 1500 by a fleet commanded by Pedro Alvarez Cabral, who was on his way to India. When he arrived, he discovered that Brazil was already inhabited by the Tupinamba Indians. He discovered that Brazil was covered in this wood called Pernambuco wood, which was really sought out for all across Europe for its unique dye. Eventually, Portugal ended up stripping Brazil of all of its wood, leaving nothing left for the Indians in order for Portugal to make a profit. The Portuguese ended up enslaving the Tupinamba Indians. So after Pernambuco wood was nearly extinct, Portugal was starting to lose money on supplies for Brazil. Portugal's government told the Governor General of Brazil, Mendes Sá, that if he didn't provide Portugal with a profit, they would lose the country and Portugal would have to dissociate itself from Brazil. Mendes Sá came up with what he thought was a brilliant idea to to build sugar plantations and to start exporting sugar for money. In order to find workers for these plantations, he enslaved the Tupinamba Indians to work the plantations. Eventually, Portugal sent Dom Pedro Fernandes to Brazil and named him the first bishop of Brazil. His mission in Brazil was to convert the Tupinamba Indians to the religion of Catholicism. His mission basically went wrong after he was murdered and eaten by the Tupinamba Indians June of 1556. Most of the Tupinamba Indians eventually fled Brazil because of slavery or died from foreign diseases like dysentery, influenza, and smallpox. After Portugal didn't have enough workers for their plantations, they looked to the slave trade for slaves to work the plantations. This basically ended up making Brazil most of population full of slavery. So the next big thing that happened was the Portuguese controlled the Brazilian gold rush. The mid 1690s, gold was discovered in Brazil and word quickly spread across Europe. People from all over Europe went to Brazil in hopes to find gold. Portugal saw this as a huge profit opportunity, and they took advantage of this by selling plots of mining land in Brazil to the highest bidder. Portugal required a quota of 30,000 pounds worth of gold from Brazil. At first, Portugal put a 20% tax on all gold that was mined in Brazil. Many people invaded this tax, which led to miners being taxed for every slave and pan being used at the mining sites. Agents were also put on mining routes to collect these taxes before the miners left. Miners avoided taxes again by having cattle carry gold instead of the slaves. The Portugal then put a tax on cattle that were not registered in the mining areas. Tax evaders would also be put in prison for evading taxes. During the gold rush, two famines occurred due to overpopulation in Brazil. The next big thing was the death of the hero Joaquim Jose Silva Xavier. In 1789, conspirators in Brazil were done with Portugal and came up with a plan to revolt in Guedes in order to gain independence from Portugal. The plan was inspired really by the American Revolutionary War. The conspirators were split on ideas and constantly just kept bumping heads. The plan was also not thought out and orchestrated. The plan failed after conspirators went to the Portuguese government and told them of the plan in order to go tax-free from Portugal on tax day. Joaquim Jose de Silva Xavier decided to be a hero and take full responsibility of the plan and was hung and torn apart publicly in Rio de Janeiro on April 21st, 1792. The rest of the conspirator leaders were just banished from Brazil and all countries affiliated with Portugal. Joaquim Jose de Silva Xavier would be known as a hero long after Brazil's independence for Portugal. Portugal was constantly scared of Brazil trying to get their independence, so Amador Patricio de Portugal constantly sent military to Brazil to scare them and close all their exports to countries other than Portugal or Portuguese affiliated countries. Dom João VI ended up trying to settle in Brazil. In 1807, Napoleon and his troops invaded Portugal during the Napoleonic Wars, which led to Prince Dom João VI, who eventually became King Dom João VI, to flee to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Right when he got there, he's made these sudden changes by turning Rio de Janeiro into the capital of Brazil, creating a sister monarchy in Brazil. He started to open up a bank and university in the new capital and open up many of the ports. This really made Rio de Janeiro look like Lisbon. So after Napoleon lost the war, Dom João VI was going to stay in Brazil and rule from there. Brazil did not want him to stay there, so they revolted against the king. Around the same time, slaves started to riot against the crown and were tired of being slaves. With this going on, Portugal ended up requesting for Dom João VI's return, and he left in 1821, leaving his 5-year-old son, Pedro I, to rule Brazil. The chief advisor, Jose Bonifacio, took advantage of Pedro's young age and pushed him to proclaim Brazil's independence from Portugal on September 7, 1822.